when you give kids less unstructured time, less time at lunch, less recess, less art, music, gym, theater, those were the unstructured times where kids were learning socialization. Where you're on the playground, you play kickball, you co-create how to play kickball. Now, kids don't have that. It's been taken from them, right? One school that I looked at for my own family, they were like, yes, we have a really strong recess program here. Of course, the kids are always allowed to go back inside and do some math studying. I was like, over my dead body. We are cramming academic content down these kids' throats. They're miserable, they're anxious, but also, just like I said, a body that needs to move and gets dysregulated gets called ADHD. A kid who doesn't get the social reps to be around other people becomes socially anxious, atypical, potentially awkward. They're offbeat with everybody. The word we use for that in our society is autistic. Some of these kids are ADHD and some of these kids are autistic, so it's an accurate diagnosis.
Hi, it's Kate from ADHDkidscanthrive.com. Before we start, I want to address the fact that I know how overwhelming it can feel to parent a child with ADHD. The questions, the challenges, the desires to give your child the best possible chance to thrive is a lot to carry for parents. That's why I want to share my journey with you through my book, How We Roll: A Parent's Journey on Raising a Child with ADHD. I've had the privilege of helping many parents like you navigate the journey of raising a child with ADHD. We've worked together to create brighter paths. All my experiences, practical tips, heartfelt insights are narrowed down into this book. To help you get started, I've made the first 3 chapters of the book available to you for free. You can check out through the link in the show notes below. Hi, it's Kate Brownfield from ADHDkidscanthrive.com. I am your host of the ADHD Kids Can Thrive podcast. Thank you for being here and thank you for all your support. I am also an ADHD parent coach and author. Okay, let's get started. I'm honored to be joined today by Dr. Matt Zakreski, a seasoned clinical psychologist who specializes in advocating for neurodivergent humans. This can include gifted, 2E, ADHD, autism, and dyslexia. He also has a new book out now called Neurodiversity Playbook. It's a pleasure to have him join us today. Please enjoy our conversation. Cass, I'm excited to talk to you today.
Well, I'm flattered. And as I dug into your podcast, and I was like, yeah, I think there's a real alignment here.
Yes.
Yeah. So.
Absolutely. So, Dr. Matt, thank you for being here. I am really looking forward to speaking with you today. I'm interested in learning more about kind of your mission and learning more about your new book that is out now called the Neurodiversity Playbook.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited to be here, and it's been quite the year for me. So I wrote my first book and published my first book, and I'm selling my first book, and I have a meeting later today to talk about the audiobook. So it's been
Oh, that's great.
yeah, it's been quite the ride.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm really looking forward to talking to you and getting kind of into the book and what it's all about. And I thought maybe a good place to start would be just like, we can never hear enough as parents, like what the neuroscience is of neurodiversity. If you could just give us a little education about that to get started.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and I ground all my work in neuroscience because as a person growing up with ADHD who was relatively late diagnosed, I wasn't diagnosed till high school because I was identified gifted in 2nd grade. And so, so it was one of those things where,
you were too smart to
I
have.
was too smart to have ADHD, right? Like, the absent-minded professor comes to mind, right? Like my backpack was a mess and I was always late. But when you're really smart and you forget there's a test, but you can study for it in 3 minutes and you get a 94, nobody questions your method, right? You're just like, oh, look how smart Matt is. And it wasn't until high school where the work got harder than I was smart that we dug into it and they were like, oh no, that actually makes a lot of sense. And now that I do this professionally, we know that one neurodivergence significantly predicts other neurodivergences at a much higher level. We know that a different brain tends to be different in a lot of different ways.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So
So
most, if you are neurodiverse, you're just not neurodiverse in one aspect.
it's increasingly that's what the research is showing us,
Yeah.
right? And and it's a real interesting challenge for us to sort of parse out all these different diagnoses because, you could basically diagnose every neurodivergent person with ADHD. I mean, one of the things that all neurodivergences have in common is weaker prefrontal cortex functioning. So, I mean, for a long time, you couldn't diagnose someone who's autistic as ADHD. They're like, That doesn't work. It doesn't go together." Now, AU ADHD is a thing, right? And it's a
Right. It's becoming a thing. Yeah.
right? And people online are like, "Oh my gosh, this explains me so much." And I'm listening to all these people. I'm like, "How many of you are also gifted?" Right? How many of you are also dyslexic? How many of you are also dysgraphic? Like, let's dig into it because we know that 1 out of 5 people are neurodivergent. And this is where the medical model starts to fail us because we can look at those things and we say, okay, we know this brain is different. The words we use for those things acts like they're this discrete thing, like this part of the brain is doing this thing, where it's really much more diffuse than that, right? We know that, like if you went to the doctor, like, oh, you're sick, they would say, you have pneumonia, you have a broken ankle, you have a sprained wrist. Those are discrete things. In the brain, it's a lot more nuanced than that, right? Because gifted kids come with executive functioning differences, right? The prefrontal cortex is weaker. Do all of them have ADHD? Not necessarily. That wouldn't be a fair thing to diagnose, but many of them do. Where's the line between typical executive dysfunction and ADHD? And
Right.
that's what makes my job very interesting.
Yes, and very challenging. Okay, and then with that, I've always heard, kind of from the experts, is to do a diagnosis that does the least amount of harm, especially for children, right,
Yeah.
who are growing and developing.
Yeah.
So is that still the practice, the guidance?
It is, though I think that that leaves a lot of interpretation open. I I tend to err on the side of diagnosis because the interventions are gonna look and feel very similar. I mean, if I diagnose you with ADHD, I'm gonna put in systems for executive functioning. I'm gonna teach you how to use your phone as an external brain. I'm gonna give you block scheduling. We're gonna hook things together and do a Pomodoro technique. And I would do that whether you're gifted or ADHD or any other executive functioning challenge, right?
Right,
Because the interventions are the same. It would be like, "Oh, do I have a cold? Do I have a virus? Do I have seasonal allergies? Well, I know if I take Dayquil, it's gonna help a little bit. It's gonna help. So I'm gonna take my Dayquil, right? And we treat the things that are left after we intervene. Like, okay, this thing's still sticking around, so let's explore that a little further.
yeah,
And
okay.
parents who say to me, they're like, "Well, I don't want my kid to have the stigma, like labels are a problem." Absolutely, right? Mental health stigma is real. I'm here for that. But I'll tell you the labels I had before I was diagnosed with ADHD were lazy, doesn't work to his potential, can't get out of his own way, scatterbrained. So you're gonna get labels either way. I'd rather have a label that can empower you rather than one that sort of speaks to some personological failing.
Yeah, that's dictated by those around you with their own judgments, right?
Yeah.
Right? To choose that. Okay, so let's talk about, I think your book, it talks about this code, right? And that's really what we want our kids to learn and to navigate is this the code in our society. that's already established. So talk to us a little bit about like how you help neurodiverse kids navigate the code, if you will.
So we said before, 1 out of 5 people are neurodivergent, right? That means 80% of people are neurotypical. The world is built by and for neurotypical folks. And that's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just it's just a thing. So to me, this locks in to what I talk about the kid is that there's a lot of shorthand, there's a lot of shortcuts that take place when neurotypicals talk to other neurotypicals. One of the examples I use in my book is I lived with my grandparents for a little while, and one day I was sitting at the kitchen table and my grandma came in. She goes, "Oh, it might rain later." I'm like, "Okay, Nana." And I ate my Cheerios, I had my coffee, I put the Boston Globe. I was like, "Okay." Later, I get a text from my mom. She's like, "Grandma's upset." I'm like, "Why is she upset?" She's like, "Well, she asked you to take in the laundry from the laundry line." I'm like, "No, she didn't." She's just, "Oh." Right?
Oh.
Because a neurotypical person might have intuited that. As a neurodivergent person, I'm like, "Sure, all right, cool,
You
rain."
took it very literally. Yeah.
Very literally, right? And, when I do workshops, I do this exercise with people. It's about pragmatic language differences, right? So the implied meaning versus the dictionary meaning. So I'll pick someone from the audience. I'll say, "All right, do me a favor, stand up." So the person stands up. Like, "Great, now sit down." I'm very intentional with my language there. Sit down. And 99 times out of 100, the person sits in their chair. I go, "Huh, why'd you sit in a chair?" They're like, "Well, you asked me to." I'm like, "Is that what I asked you to do?" And they look at me, they're like, "No, you asked me to sit down." Right? So there's an implied meaning, sit in your chair. I don't want them to sit on the floor. That's weird. But if you're a very concrete person, as many neurodivergent people are, they would not be wrong by sitting straight down on the ground. But then the teacher or the adult goes, "What are you doing sitting on the ground? Get up, sit in your chair. You didn't listen to me." And the kid says, "Yeah, I did listen to you. You said sit down. I sat down." Right? Like I sat in a downward motion, right?
Right.
So this is one example of the multitude of ways that neurodivergent people feel outside of this code, right? This sort of shared
Yes.
language that neurotypical people have. And since they really form the monoculture, we've got to figure out how to navigate those moments because there's going to be just a lot of disconnect and misunderstanding, most of which of that doesn't come from a place of, ill intent, right? There's no malice there, but it can cause a lot of trouble.
Right. And a lot of stress,
Yeah.
right, in the child, right? Trouble and stress. So is it possible to navigate that code? I mean, that's kind of what the neurodiverse playbook is about, right? Is learning how to navigate that.
And, and the language we use in there is really about you don't need to. m- So, sorry, let me take a quick step back. So, the word for when a neurodivergent person is trying to act neurotypical, the word there is masking, right? So, you mask. And that's a word for a long time we only really use with the autistic community. This awareness of how different we are and how atypical we are, you know, I speak at a lot of conferences, and a lot of the speakers at ADHD and gifted conferences are themselves neurodivergent. So what like they're like very pleasant and professional when they're in public, right? People are talking to them, sign my book, ask me a question. When you go back to the green room, people start stimming, people start like playing on their phones, like you feel like you can drop that mask a little
Right.
bit. So the book is not, "Hey, here's how to mask more effectively," because there's a lot of downstream negative impacts of that. To me, it's about code switching. So, like,
Okay.
so if I'm meeting with someone who like wants me to come out, like, "Hey, we're going to pay you $20,000 to come out and speak at our conference," I'm going to be the most neurotypical version of myself. I'm going to be like, "Well, yes, I am a very mature and focused and poised young man. I'm not looking at any other screens on my computer at all. I am listening to you. I'm making very good eye contact."
Yes, you are.
And I'm going to do that for as long as it takes to get that contract. But then at this point in my life, I schedule myself a little 15-minute decompression time where I'm like, "Gotta shake it out, right? Gotta." gotta go quickly read some Reddit or something,
Decompress, be myself.
right? And there's wisdom to being able to code switch, right? It can help us navigate the world more effectively until we're in spaces and places that honor and celebrate who we are. And part of my journey as a therapist is to help people find those spaces, right? If your company doesn't get the fact that you're autistic and you don't do small talk and you don't want to go to the company happy hour, then we need to find you a job that does get that and does honor that because uh, that's an authentic version of who you are. And I want you spending as much energy as possible doing the things that you're here to do, not sending however much bandwidth you've got towards, like, acting the way you think you need to act, right? There's a
Got it.
fundamental difference there.
Got it. Okay, and just getting some highlights too about your book. I thought you really do focus on how SEL, which is social emotional learning, is just so important to a kid's development. And I do think that's very overlooked in general um, for just children. It's just something that's assumed that you kind of figure out
Yeah.
for all kids. And then that's really where neurodiverse kids can really struggle, right? And so you talk about like actually if you could talk about like what is SEL and why is that important? What does that look like?
So, this ties in actually to sort of the modern approach to diagnosis and, like, like, doesn't everybody have ADHD right now, right? Doesn't everybody have autism right now? So, since the passage of No Child Left Behind in the early aughts, we've seen a drastic uptick in diagnoses of ADHD, autism, but also behavioral challenges in school.
Yes. Okay. You are the first expert who has actually called that out. That it
Oh,
is the No Child Left Behind policy that has changed everything for children. Okay. Thank you.
if this was Scooby Doo, we would rip the mask off and it's No Child Left Behind, right? And those,
Okay.
like, it's a whole thing. So, like,
Thank you for saying that out loud.
oh man, like, how long do we have, right? We could. So, what we've seen is as downstream effects of No Child Left Behind is a drastic reduction in recess. Recess levels have dropped 71% in 20 years.
Wow.
So,
Okay.
passing
And
yeah.
yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I also PE is very important. But also, what about like the arts, like art
Oh, yeah.
class, music class? All of that has been eliminated too.
We are not only eliminating those classes where kids are learning with their hands and they're moving their bodies, we are substituting those classes with more academic work, more seated didactic learning.
Yeah.
You know, people ask me all the time, like, well, what should school look like? I'm like, bring back shop, bring back wood shop, bring back home ec, bring back gym, bring back recess. Let kids have time in school before school starts to sit and hang, right? Because when kids can't move their bodies, they get fidgety, they get antsy. The word we have for an antsy kid in modern society is ADHD. That kid has ADHD because they can't sit still. Every single person needs to move their body. People with ADHD need to move it more and have a lower threshold. But I was looking at a school up here in North Jersey, and this kindergarten teacher is screaming at this 5-year-old because she's not seated with her feet flat on the floor. This little girl was not tall enough to sit with her feet flat on the floor in this chair. So this little girl, instead of learning her alphabet, is trying to focus to keep her feet on the ground. She's spending so much energy on that. She had a behavioral meltdown. Like, she really had a tough time with it. And I'm sitting there going like, this little girl, if we're not careful, is going to get diagnosed with ADHD. Where I'm going to say, I think if she was in a Montessori program where she could sit wherever the heck she wanted, I don't think this would be a problem. She would be able to move her body and regulate in the way she needs to. Right? And, when I speak at conferences, people get up, they wander around, some people lay on the ground, you know, and that doesn't bother me because you need to do the things you need to do to move your body to regulate. But for some reason, we let adults do that. We don't let kids do
Kids
that.
do that. And do you think this is leading to the anxiety and depression that we're seeing with young people too?
Absolutely, right?
which
Because
are friends of ADHD,
absolutely.
so they can and that is on the rise with children.
And that comes from a lot of things, right? I don't know if you've read the news anytime recently, but everything seems terrible all the time.
Yeah.
When you give kids less unstructured time, less time at lunch, less recess, less art, music, gym, theater, all those things, those were the unstructured times where kids were learning socialization, where you're on the playground, you play kickball, you co-create how to play kickball. Now, kids don't have that. It's been taken from them, right? One school, that I looked at for my own family, they were like, "Yes, we have a really strong recess program here." Of course, the kids are always allowed to go back inside and do some math studying. I was like, "Over my dead body," right? No, I mean, play is the work of childhood, right? And we are cramming academic content down these kids' throats. They're miserable, they're anxious, but also, just like I said, a body that needs to move and gets dysregulated gets called ADHD. A kid who doesn't get the social reps to be around other people becomes socially anxious, atypical, potentially awkward. They're offbeat with everybody. The word we use for that in our society is autistic.
Yeah.
So some of these kids are ADHD and some of these kids are autistic. So it's an accurate diagnosis. But we are throwing all of these kids who are socially asynchronous into the pile of humans that we call autistic, and that has some major negative impacts because, is this a kid who just needs the time to be around friends and learn how to be near people, right? I know lots of socially awkward people who aren't autistic, and I know a lot of autistic people who aren't socially awkward. But we've gotta be looking at this through the right lens, and the environmental impact of how we're approaching these questions is shaping the data that we're seeing, which is shaping the diagnoses we give.
Okay, say that again.
Okay. So because we're getting sort of a shifted data set, right? We're getting different data, which is shaping the way we see these kids. And because it's shaping the way we see these kids, it's shaping the way we diagnose them.
Okay. So, and the data is coming from the environment. So this environment that we're all living in is kind of shaping our response as neurodiverse people,
Yeah.
right? So it's a response to the environment, which is right. It's kids' nervous systems responding to an environment that isn't fitting their system,
Yeah.
right?
Yep. I mean, that's exactly how I feel about it. Because it's amazing how often I get kids who come to me with other diagnoses because their environment isn't giving them what they need. Like, I do an exercise where I show 5 cases that I've been sent over the years, kids who were referred to me for something else who were not initially diagnosed as gifted, that we found that out through good exploration. One of those kids, was head in the clouds, space cadet, doodling on everything. He's not that smart. He's getting B's and C's. You know, I'm like, oh, well, this kid's gifted. Put him in the gifted classroom. This behavior will go away. They're like, no, no, no. He's not smart enough to be gifted. I'm like, no, no, no. He's not getting good enough grades to be gifted. That's a different thing. A lot of neurodivergent people don't do school well. But I was like, give this kid a month. It was actually around this time of year. I was like, put him in from Thanksgiving to Christmas. And if I'm wrong, I'll shut up about it. But I have a feeling that you're going to put him in there and he will lock in because finally he's got something that's worth caring about. And on the third day, the principal called me. He's like, "You're right. I was wrong. You're smart."
He's
I'm like, fine.
stimulated and doing the work.
Like, because idle hands are the devil's plaything, right? I mean, if this kid is so smart and he can do addition in like 10 seconds, he's going to disengage,
Yeah.
need to pay attention. And yeah, he'll miss things because he's disengaging. But the gifted teacher was like, hey, all right, cool. So we're doing Legos today. We're going to do Legos to talk about foundational concepts of architecture and calculus. And this kid was like, this is the best day of my life. Like, Lego, calculus, architecture. And, I mean, it was so cool to see that happen because all the labels we were throwing at this kid to try and understand who he was, we were dealing with the symptoms, not the cause,
Yeah.
right? And when we can uncover stuff like that in my line of work, there's no greater joy for me.
Yeah.
And look at this.
Absolutely. Okay, so Dr. Matt, parents listening to this who have neurodiverse kids, we know the environment that they're growing up in, which is school for the most part. What can parents do to try to bring the environment and their child's brain neurodiversity kind of working better together so their child can grow up and feel good about who they are and find their way in life and their mission in life? Like, how do parents navigate this?
So the single biggest intervention we can give kids at this age is an environment that honors their brains, honors who they are. At this growing up, kids spend more time in school than they do at home. So and so people are like, "Oh, Dr. Matt, should we just do more therapy with you?" I'm like, "Honestly, you get in 1 hour a week with me, 1 hour every other week if you're lucky, right?" There's an upper limit on how effective therapy can be. We've got to test drive these things in the real world. So if you're a family that can get your kid a 504 plan to codify some of the better practices for teaching a neurodivergent learner, if you can write an IEP, or if you live in a state that has a gifted IEP, we should write a gifted IEP. If we can put them in the charter school or the nested gifted program, right? Those environments have a compounding effect of positivity. It's not a vicious cycle, it's a virtuous cycle. And and if the public school is not playing ball, if they're fighting you tooth and nail, if they don't get it, then you call somebody like me and we fight to get them out of that district, into a school that's going to get this.
More fitting
And
for them.
right. And there are a lot of schools out there that are doing this. Some of them are online, some of them are in person, some of them are hybrid, but that's the best investment you can make in your kid. Because if you've got a school, I'm thinking about one in particular up in Connecticut, that's like lay on the ground. Like like every one of their classrooms has like a climbing structure because sometimes their kids need that vestibular input, right? So you got kids who are hanging off the monkey bars learning calculus. And like if that's what your brain needs to learn, if we normalize that, then those kids are just learning, right? But imagine doing that in like high school. They'd
Right. You're not gonna get the kind of
throw you in
experience.
the sea. They'd be like, going to
Yeah.
you. Oh, but you know, and like one of the kid, like I say to public school administrators all the time, K-12, it's like school should look more like college, right? A lot of passing time, a lot of choice, a lot of sit how you want, move your body how you want, learn how you want, because that's ultimately what kids need. They don't need more worksheets. They don't need more PowerPoints. They need to learn by doing. They need to get their hands dirty, right?
Right.
They need their bodies. And it's amazing to see how like the solutions here are not some another $80,000 program you buy from some consultant. It's actually just returning to our roots as educators and mental health professionals and just saying like, let's just play today. Let's build blocks. Let's finger paint. Let's, spend the class talking about prom. Like those things, they're not only helping our kids learn better academically, those moments shape them into the human beings and citizens we want our kids to be.
Yeah. Yeah. So as parents, it's to just continue to advocate. You're empowering parents to just kind of embrace that role as advocacy for their
Mhm.
kid and find the right path for them, hopefully in a school or get the school on board, right? Okay, so Dr. Matt, as we wrap up, what would be kind of your overall arching words of wisdom for parents? And before that, the neurodivergent playbook is available now, right? On Amazon?
It's on Amazon. Currently, we're back ordered on Amazon because we've had a lot of people want to buy the book. Um,
Congratulations.
I'm still wrapping my hat. I like that. Just it's like what a strangely wonderful problem to have. So you can order it on Amazon. You can also order it through the publisher, which is Gifted Unlimited Press. And you can also contact me, and I will sign a copy and mail it to you myself. I just
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, I was at the post office this morning shipping another 20 books out. So, we just want you to have it, right? And, and the audiobook will be done soon, we promise. You know, so that you can listen to it at 1.5 times speed as you drive around. I know what my ADHDers need, right? For the parents out there, I will say this. The famous line is that it takes a village to raise a child. The rest of that line is that it takes a village to raise that child's parent as well. So all of the things that are out there, and there's obviously, you know, copious stuff to parent kids. Not a lot of it is written for the parents of neurodivergent kids, right? So the playbooks that other people are using will not work for your kid. But if you keep trying to jam those square pegs through round holes, you're just going to end up gaslighting yourself. You're like, why is this not working? Why am I a terrible parent? You're not. You never were. But you're using a screwdriver when you need to saw something, and you're wondering why it's not working, right? So plug into children and adults with ADHD, right? The CHAD organization or the ADHD conference, or there's a lot of resources out there. And the more we learn, the more we find community, the more like, worst case scenario, you talk to other parents who get it. Best case scenario, you talk to the same parents and they give you strategies and techniques that you haven't tried yet.
Yeah.
And then you find your life getting better and easier. And then you're spending less time fighting with your kid, redirecting behavior, and more time loving them for who they are.
It's wonderful advice. Thank you. It's been a pleasure to speak with you and meet you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm flattered once again. You know, you're a tremendous host. It's just such a treat to talk to somebody who wants to learn so much about this and is just amplifying the good work. So I mean, it's a treat for me as well. So thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, you're welcome. My pleasure. And I wish you all the best with the book. Sounds amazing.
Thank you. I hope you get one too.
Yes, I will. I'm going to check it out right now. I was reading about it and getting as much as I could about you to prepare for this, but I am looking forward to reading it too.
Awesome.
So thank you much. Have a great holiday. Happy New Year.